The concept of a parallel universe, a world similar to our own but differing slightly, perhaps possessing a subtle divergence in history, has always been a prevalent theme in literature. Several individuals have even claimed to have visited alternate realities, experiencing a slightly different, possibly darker, version of the world we know. The vast majority of these people are certainly crackpots, or cranks desiring attention. Nonetheless, a small percentage of these claims are difficult to dismiss, and lead me to significant doubt about the true nature of the world. A couple months ago, I think that I actually experienced briefly life in an alternate timeline. From what I can see, this subreddit might be open to stories beyond the ordinary, and I at least hope that you take the time to consider my account. On June 28, 2014, my morning was the same as any other day. I woke up, brushed my teeth, ate breakfast, got in the car to go to work. I was confused, however, after I switched on the radio. I usually listen to music on my morning drive, but the station was playing some sort of news talk show. The host was exuberantly referencing our victory in the Great War, as he praised troops and the armed forces. At first I thought that he was discussing the recent end to the war in Afghanistan, as our combat troops were withdrawing at the time. I was confused, however, when he started discussing the conclusion of our victory in Italy, and how the Second Great Depression will come to an end as our victory is secured. I assumed that this was some strange sci-fi or fictional program, and largely forgot about it. At my lunch break at work, however, I overheard my office coworkers talking about our victory in Italy and how unity will be preserved. For some reason, they kept mentioning the numbers 33-30. I asked them what the hell they were discussing, but they told me that my ignorance was disrespectful towards the troops. It was then that I noticed that one of my fellow coworkers, Sam, was not present. When I asked if he was sick, nobody knew who he was. Strange. On the way home, I took a different route, through the city to avoid traffic. Numerous victory banners were hanging on the walls of buildings, showing images of American Marines braving some foreign beach. I couldn't help noticing that the city looked far poorer than I remembered, and many buildings were abandoned and crumbling. In my apartment, I turned on CNN just to understand what was going on. The hosts discussed how Italian logistical targets were decisively defeated with little civilian casualty, and that the insurgency in Greece and Ireland is drawing down with every passing day. The experience was so unexpected, so bizarre, that I can still remember the words of the newscasters vividly. I decided to peruse Wikipedia, as I knew that the site would at least give an overview of the war. As I read the page, I grew increasingly confused and bewildered. The Greek debt crisis had exponentially increased in intensity, there was a string of defaults across Europe, and the Eurozone collapsed into civil war. The United States was in a worse depression than the 1930s, as global finance collapsed, and the war bankrupted our economy further. Ireland and Greece were occupied by coalition forces, and there was a violent nationalist insurgency in both countries. I decided that I must be dreaming. To test whether this was really happening, I took screenshots of the pages on my phone. According to the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, each event leads to a divergence of timelines, with a different outcome corresponding to a different reality. It seems that somehow, somewhere, our universe diverged, and a different, darker timeline formed. Throwaway account, 'cause this is really personal. My last semester at a certain college, I was assaulted by a football player for walking where he was trying to drive. Note, he was 325 blabes. I was 120 blabes. While unconscious on the ground, I lived a different life. I met a wonderful young lady. She made my heart skip and my face red. I pursued her for months and dispatched a few jerk boyfriends before I finally won her over. After 2 years, we got married, and almost immediately she bore me a daughter. I had a great job and my wife didn't have to work outside of the house. When my daughter was 2, my wife bore me a son. My son was the joy of my life. I would walk into his room every morning before I left for work and doted on him and my daughter. One day, while sitting on the couch, I noticed that the perspective of the lamp was odd, like inverted. It was still in 3D, but I was transfixed. I couldn't look away from it. I stayed up all night staring at it. The next morning, I didn't go to work. Something was just not right about that lamp. I stopped eating. I left the couch only to use the bathroom at first. Soon I stopped that too, as I wasn't eating or drinking. I stared at the fucking lamp for 3 days before my wife got really worried. She had someone come and try to talk to me. By this time, my cognizance was breaking up and my wife was freaking out. She took the kids to her mother's house just before I had my epiphany. The lamp is not real. The house is not real. My wife, my kids, none of that is real. The last 10 years of my life are not fucking real. The lamp started to grow wider and deeper. It was still inverted dimensions. It took up my entire perspective, and all I could see was red. I heard voices, screams, all kinds of weird noises, and I became aware of pain. A fucking shit ton of pain. The first words I said were, "I'm missing teeth," and opened my eyes. I was laying on my back on the sidewalk surrounded by people that I didn't know. Lots were freaking out. I was completely confused. At some point a cop scooped me up, walked me across the sidewalk and grass, and threw me face down in the back of a cop car. I was still confused. I was taken to the hospital by the cop. Seems he didn't want to wait for the ambulance to arrive. I went through about 3 years of horrid depression. I was grieving the loss of my wife and children, and dealing with the knowledge that they never existed. I was scared that I was going insane as I would cry myself to sleep, hoping I would see her in my dreams. I never have, but sometimes I see my son, usually just a glimpse out of my peripheral vision. He is perpetually 5 years old, and I can never hear what he says. So at a pretty bad time in my life, I had moved in with a friend. I was sleeping on her couch, and she would sleep in her room on an air mattress. Sometimes she'd be gone, and I'd sleep on her air mattress. The mattress had a leak on it, which meant constantly having to turn it on to fill it back up. The switch to the air mattress was right next to this big crater hole. Anyways, one night she comes out of her room and tells me that the air mattress is different and that the hole is gone. So I go in there, and sure enough, the hole wasn't there anymore. We both kind of brush it off and go to bed. When we woke up in the morning, everything just felt different. Even she agreed that things didn't feel normal. I went to Speedway as I did every morning, and even that was just strange. There were no workers that I knew, all new faces. Keep in mind, I've been going there every day 2 years straight, and it's always the same people. My friend and I discussed how strange everything felt. Even the air felt different. We tried to tell other people about this to see if they felt the same thing, and they all would just dismiss the whole thing. A week passed, and everything still felt off. The next morning, I wake up to my friend frantically laughing, yelling for me to come here quick. I go in her room and she tells to look at the air mattress. Sure enough, the hole was back, and even weirder is that the weird energy wasn't a thing anymore. I even went to Speedway as I always did for my morning coffee, and the familiar faces and people were back. Obviously, I don't know what happened, but I know I'm not crazy. Something was going on beyond my understanding.